So let's talk about last weekend's opinion column. It's
Yes.
one of the ones that tends to ruffle a lot of feathers. It's a sensitive issue, and that's on the transgender language battle, basically.
Yes, there's a lot going on, obviously, with transgenderism in schools, as we can see, not just in Canada, but in the U.S. and DeSantis's bill in Florida, preventing sex from being talked about in kindergarten classes. I don't know how this is really a thing, since when I was in school, I think we didn't have sex ed until grade 7, and yet parents had to sign a permission form. Now you can give a kid life-altering hormone drugs and not have to tell the parents because it's the privacy of the kid. Like, it makes no sense. But what I talked about this past weekend is, I call it the transgender mob. And that is basically, there's a group of individuals that are pushing an ideology that doesn't actually affect that many people. I mean, I actually have a psychology degree, and when I graduated in 2008, back then, transgenderism was called gender dysphoria. It still is to today as a technical medical term, but it was treated as a mental illness back then. Just to give you an example, people with gender dysphoria have 10 times higher chance of committing suicide than someone in the regular population. And the way that people are dealing with this now is to transition the person from male to female, or from female to male. And as we know, biology says, no, that's not exactly how it works. And because of that, you're now seeing a huge backlash against it. We've seen the thing with Disney, for example. And there was a professor that did a report. And the reason she did this report on this sort of rise, and it's been since 2010, that there's been this massive rise in females wanting to transition to males. Well, it turns out, she called it rapid onset gender dysphoria. Turned out, she studied, what happens when one person in a school decides that they're transgender. All of a sudden, it catches on in the school. I know when I was in journalism school in the UK, there was one grade school with kids up to the age of 12, where 20% of the students were medically transitioning in a single school. Now, she called it a social contagion. Basically means it's being passed not genetically. There's no way the human beings would have changed that much genetically that all of a sudden this rapid rise in transgenderism would happen. It's just, there's no way for it to genetically happen that fast without some sort of huge change in humans genetically, and we would notice that in some way, shape, or form. So she released her study and said it's based on entirely, it's a social thing. First, a kid will see something on TikTok, and then that kid will want to transition. And then the next thing you know, it's a peer group thing. Oh, maybe I should transition. And then all of a sudden, you got 4 or 5 students in a single grade, a single peer group that all of a sudden feel that they're the opposite sex. And then they go about doing, life alternating.
Well, and that's where the concern comes, is if you start doing irreversible changes. I mean, fine, let kids consider things, try things, and some, I think, it's opinion, but are genuinely trans, and even once they become adults, they're going to say, I identify as such, and I'd like to transition, and I'll go. But when you see those numbers that high, yes, then this, again, let's not start some hormone replacement and things that might stunt things when a kid, as we know, you change your mind on everything every 6 months. You don't want to make a life-altering decision. They can't vote until they're 18, yet we're allowing a permanent body alteration. It's a dangerous territory.
Without parental permission. I mean, the funny thing is, if my daughter has a headache at school, they have to call me to get permission to give her a Tylenol, but they don't to give her life-alternating puberty blockers. I mean, she can't go to the zoo on a school field trip without me signing something, but all of a sudden over in this one area, nope, sorry, parents, you're not involved in this anymore. And I think it's just a part of a larger assault on family values that we've seen, particularly in the last 25, 30 years. And it's gotten to the point that it's somewhat ridiculous. I mean, in Wisconsin right now, there's a school with 3 middle school students. They're 12 and 13 years old. And they're being charged with sexual assault for not using the preferred pronouns of a classmate. They use the biological pronouns. If you look up in Wisconsin what the definition of sexual assault is and what you can be charged for sexual assault for, using the wrong pronouns isn't one of those things. And so we're now seeing this craziness go into the court system just because some 13-year-olds will not call a classmate he when it's a she. And it's not just that. Like, I don't know if you've seen this, but Target this past weekend in the States came out with an entire, I mean, there's cups, there's clothing, you name it, everything. And it's all transgender. So you can buy a mug that says they or their on them, so people know your proper pronouns.
Well, they
So
can
there's
have at
t-shirts.
it. I mean,
We'll see if it actually sells.
Yeah, that line you're talking about
Yeah.
being crossed, though, is when you're criminally charging people
Yeah.
for saying things. I mean, it's an unfortunate trend, I think, in the sense that the activists have taken it over, though, the extreme end of it. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, we saw this when gay rights, I think, thankfully, you know, were brought up and did much better and came out in the open, and we had pride events. And then the activist element, though, you go to a pride event, and I went to some of those in the 90s. It helped me change, you know, my thinking and become more tolerant and accepting of people, getting to interact and meet people. And but there was always the one who insists also that I want to put on a leather G-string and stick my ass in somebody's face during the parade, or it should be my right to swing my nuts around on a float. And you got to push it too far.
Yeah.
But the difference now, it seems, with the trans activists, and I know not a lot of, you know, one trans adult, it seems she's very well adjusted and knows what she wants and knows what she did, but she's not out there with the screaming activist element who's on the front line. And we shouldn't be indulging the extreme fringe, yet here we are.
Unfortunately, I mean, the definition of democracy is mob rule, but right now it's not. And I don't mean mob in, like, you know, kill 'em sense of a mob, but I mean, that's the definition of democracy. The largest group gets to kind of decide the rules. And we're seeing a change in that, where a small minority group is making the rules for everybody else and then trying to do the same thing onto them. And that is where the issues come up. And parents need to start being involved in any of these medical decisions. Like it's important for parents to be involved in their kids. Like, if my daughter decided that she was trans, I would hope the school would come to me and tell me before they would start doing things. Like in the olden days, that would happen no matter what it was. And it's interesting you mentioned about the gay pride and back in the 90s and stuff like that. I have had people reach out to me who are in the LGB part of the community who do not like all these other things being tacked onto them because, one, there's a sexual preference. Transgender has nothing to do with sexual preference. And some people in the community are upset that they're being put all together when in reality it's kind of different.
Well, the alphabet crowd's getting really crowded and complicated. And I mean, the trans community is fighting a lot with the feminist community now, too. Because,
well, that's the thing. There's
women have been fighting as feminists for their unique identity and who they are and to establish. And then suddenly, you know, Larry over there says, "Oh, I'm a woman this week." And you have to indulge Loretta, and whatever that may be. And can I, you know, there's where some of the ridiculousness came along too, is when it came to the point of just identifying. The second somebody identifies, suddenly you're calling it full blown. I mean, I don't know how you measure it, but there should be a degree of commitment. I mean, if the nuts and berries are still hanging there, I'm sorry, but technically you're a guy.
Caitlyn Jenner is a guy. I mean, hasn't had surgery.
And if you want to be called she, and as much as I can indulge, I'm fine with that, of course. But sports,
that's where I have the biggest issue.
Prisons, we've had that. I mean,
we've had some very serious problems in prisons.
What was it?
And hospitals.
Yes, I mean, there's cases where we segregate people of different sexes for a reason.
Yep, there was a hospital in the UK where a woman was raped, and it took the hospital a year to admit that she was raped.
And you wrote on that before.
And I wrote about that before because they said, no, there's no males on this wing because there was a transgender person. Well, not only was it witnessed by a nurse, there was video, and it took the hospital a year to admit that it was a man. And when the police called the hospital, they said, no, that couldn't have happened. There was no men on the ward.
Yeah, well, there's an American prison. I think there were 2 female prisoners got pregnant from a trans roommate or cellmate, I guess you could say, or whatnot. Like, it's just we're getting to the point of absurdity. And I mean, allow a nuanced discussion. I think we can be sensitive while just maintaining some common sense on some of these things. Try, but they've shut down the discussion. That's the problem.
And that's the problem, is that as soon as you say something like, oh, you're transphobic. Well, no, I just want to have a discussion about this. I'm not saying that some people shouldn't transition. What I'm saying is there needs to be a conversation, particularly with minors, you know, like that. As a parent, I want any decision medically about my daughter to be involved in that.
So here's where it gets a little more dicey too, though. I mean, some kids might genuinely be, you know, being trans or so on, moving towards it. when the gay straight alliances were a big issue in Alberta for a while and a big problem. But there was a valid point put out that unfortunately there are some intolerant or abusive parents out there sometimes.
Yes.
And if some parents might have found out that their child was gay, they could potentially abuse or be abusive or just not respond well to it. So the kid would only feel safe in the school environment to start, coming into their being and realizing who they are and so on. It's just a complicated area, is all I'm saying. I mean, the parental involvement is critical, as you say, especially when there's medical involvement in what
and
we're
it's
talking.
life alternating.
Yes,
life altering. Like, we're not talking about deciding to wear a different color T-shirt or something. We're talking about things that, medically speaking, like, once you do something, you can't go back.
No, and that's part of. That's where I debated a bit when I did a podcast interview with Tiffany, who I've spoken with, and she's trans, but she felt that the gender, blocking isn't necessarily as permanent. I don't know. I mean, part of the goal though is to get it as fast as you can, so you can stop things from developing, because it makes it for a more complete transition later.
Yes.
Okay, I can understand the need, but again, that shows that it's irreversible. Then we're talking, if with a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old. Are they really sure yet?
Yeah, and I'm doing a story on Jazz Jennings. She was interviewed in 2007 by Barbara Walters, her and her family, and she decided to transition at a very young age, about 5. And she's now in her 20s, and she had a reality show for 7 or 8 years about her living her trans life through school and stuff like that. And now she has had multiple surgeries to try and fix certain issues, including at one point she was told not to look between her legs by both her doctor and her parents. She's gained 100 pounds, she's depressed, and she's come out publicly now talking about this and being like, they took part of her colon to make a female body part. Originally she was male, but she was raised as a female that whole time. And so there are some people who have a lot of issues with the surgeries and what happens, and things that just don't work correctly the way they're supposed to.
There's just a lot to be discussed. I mean, there's a lot of misunderstanding. It's like, some of the commenting we got, I just, in looking at Wilder saying homosexual proclivities are a learned behavior. That's a load of baloney, buddy. They don't choose it. And you can't choose to, I can't choose not to be straight. I'm sorry, nothing I do, no amount of movies or instruction or anything else is going to change that. And for a gay person, you're not going to make them suddenly crave the opposite. It doesn't work.
No.
I know there's some people who feel
like that. What do they call it? The conversion therapies
and things like. All you can really do is mess with somebody. If you've got somebody who really is gay and you try and push and you're just going to really make it much worse.
Well, the guy who ran the biggest conversion therapy camps in the U.S. ended up shutting it down because he realized he wasn't helping anyone, and he realized he was just fighting his own battles inside of him, and then went back and said, you know what? I'm gay, and I don't think any amount of this therapy is going to work. It hasn't worked in these camps I've done.
No.
It hasn't worked for me. It's just biologically the way I'm made up.
The main one that gets me is say people who were gay in the 70s and 80s, it wasn't illegal yet, but I mean, you got ostracized. You went through grief. You put up with crap with your
Unfortunately,
family.
that still happens.
Do you really think people chose that? I'm sure I can't imagine it wasn't there. I was fortunate in the sense that I was always with the majority. I didn't have to question myself or where I was going. But I mean, I'm sure a lot when they were coming into it was just, why can't I be straight? Why can't I? Because they can't, because that's not who they are. And
one of my friends, his dad threw a brick at him when he told him he was gay, like a literal brick.
So
and thinking that would make him straight. And I was like, no, that just hurts your kid.
So it's just a tough area. That's the main goal. And with kids, but again, with somebody coming out or learning about themselves, becoming gay, it's not the same as starting to get ready for surgery, or transitional drugs. Okay, we've been on this for a bit though. Let's talk about some of your other stuff. You had a story. Well, let's talk about your next column though. Actually, you're already thinking a bit about that or looking ahead, or
well, I have a story that came out today on there is a repeat sexual offender with child pornography who it was just released publicly, but earlier, like last month, he had his when you commit certain crimes, in this case child pornography, when you're getting sentenced, you go in front of a certain type of judge to see whether or not you should be put on the National Sex Offender Registry list. And there's 2 parts to the list. that you can be put on. Now, this guy is a repeat offender. It's been a long problem for this individual. They were first caught in 2008, charged, went to jail, came out, caught again in 2019. This is the second time, uploading child pornography to, they won't tell us what website, but an unidentified website.
Doesn't
And it
matter,
was
yeah.
reported by the website. So obviously it wasn't,
They didn't want it. Yeah,
they didn't want it on that website, whatever website it was. And so this guy got the child unit in the Saskatchewan police force, was able to track it to his house. They did go to his house. They looked at his phone first. That was the only warrant they had originally. They found child pornography on his cell phone. Since he was on his own property, they can then search the whole property, which they did. They found computers. They found like USB drives. They found another cell phone with pornography on it, all child pornography, and obviously arrested him. And this is the second time. And so he had this court hearing, and he got what is called a long-term offender list. Now, this is not the one that you want to put someone on who has been a repeat offender. There is one called the dangerous offenders, and that's a permanent list. That's when you're on the registry. You have to register wherever you live. You're under constant supervision if you ever get out of jail for the rest of your life. And quite often, the ones who are on the dangerous offenders list actually have no end to their sentence until they feel that they could be possibly safely put in outside of the criminal justice system. So he gets 6 years in jail for all of the different offenses. There was multiple offenses. And then he's going to have 10 years of being on this long-term list. Now he's 50, which means he's by his mid-60s, he's going to be back out with no supervision at all, because the longest you could be on that long-term list is 10 years. This now puts him in a position that by his mid-60s, he could be repeat offending and going for his third jail sentence for child pornography. Also in his sentence, there was no limit when he gets out on whether or not he can have access to the internet or a cell phone and things like that. Quite often that is put onto those sorts of offenses to prevent the ability for that person to even commit the crime again. He also got time served as well, which means that in 48 months, he's going to be back out on the street. And then 10 years, he'll have the long-term supervision list. This is, I think, a prime example of some of the problems we have with the sex registry list in Canada. He has clearly, and you can go and look at this on the government website, it lists what you need to be considered a dangerous offender. One of the things is just possessing child porn. Never mind uploading it onto sites and sharing it with others, which he did. The only thing he didn't do was actually create the pornography himself. Still, the distribution is also a major issue, and he distributed it in multiple different places, and he had thousands of images. This type of behavior does not deserve 6 years in jail. I mean, he was not released to the public, so he got his time served counted towards his 6 years. So he couldn't make bail because he was too dangerous to be let out back into the community, but we're going to let him out in 48 months. It just does not make any sense.
It's ridiculous. And I was searching for a while if people saw me looking for something while you were talking, because we had a story by Arthur Green the other day too. This is
here in Alberta.
A convicted child rapist is on the lam with new charges. We knew he was a child rapist, and now he's gone out again, and he's aggravated assault, forcible confinement, rape, theft of a motor vehicle. A victim was a woman. And in a story I wrote last week, or a column, I was going on about 3 Alberta women, all killed in the last year by repeat offenders. One was the police warned us. They said, this man's a sex offender. We know he's going to reoffend. Watch out for him. He's probably going to assault a woman and or a child. And it turned out he killed a woman and a child. The other one who shot a young lady and killed her, a 23-year-old. He had a long history in and out of jail with domestic abuse, and police warned again. And these guys are on supposed registries, but they're obviously not watching it very closely because they're getting in and near victims again and doing these things. Our system.
There's something broken in our criminal justice system.
Definitely something.
I mean, even if you look at the U.S. Supreme Court justice, I realize that's America, but the latest justice that just she'll be put on court shortly. One of the big things at her hearings was her very short sentencing for people, child rapists, child porn, giving them like 2 years, like the absolute bare minimum. And it's like, why are you giving some person like this that rapes a kid like 2 years in jail? How does that make any sense at all?
There's certain ones you'd think would be no-brainers that almost all of society is horrified by, wants to prevent, wants to stop. Yet we can't seem to keep them.
And they're also the highest reoffenders.
Yes, the terrible recidivism rate.
Child porn guy here, he's a repeat offender, 2008, which means he was viewing it before 2008 because that was the first time he was caught.
Yeah.
Who knows how long he was actually viewing and possessing and transmitting this to other individuals before he actually got caught. And that's the problem. This guy has clearly been involved in child pornography for over a decade and a half.
So what are you going to be looking at this weekend that you were going to expand further on that, you were saying?
Yeah, well, I'm going to do my opinion column this weekend on like this individual type of thing, and sort of the attack we've seen on children in terms of the lack of, in this case, protecting kids from someone who's a child pornographer, and also, going out and, transitioning kids from one sex to another without even asking the parents' permission. I feel that there's this sort of assault on kids right now, and we as parents kind of need to stand up and be like, look, someone who's convicted of child porn doesn't get 6 years, they get 25. Think of the psychological damage to a child being involved in child pornography. 6 years for this dude over here, but he affected how many kids because of his addiction to child pornography and the effects on them for the rest of their lives. And then you have also things like the transgender thing. You're affecting a kid for the rest of their life. Parents should be involved in that situation, and they're not. And in many cases, there's a case in Florida where a father was going to court to stop his kid from transitioning because his ex-wife was transitioning the child. He lost the court case because he was only the father. And we're seeing this over and over again, this assault on kids. And we need to stand up and start protecting our kids and being involved in the equation. Because right now, in certain states, and even in provinces, you're taken out of the equation completely. And since when do we allow the educational system to decide our kids? I mean, it's getting to the point now that it's almost like homeschooling is starting to look really good, because of this complete assault on kids and particularly, family values in general.
Just let kids be kids. Why is it so hard?
Yeah.
They got a whole lifetime after 16, 18 years old to move on and adjust 18, and grow and learn. And
if you're 18 and you want to transition, I have absolutely no issues with that because you're an adult.
With a lot of this too, where they're hung up, at 6 or 7 years old. Come on, guys, they're eating dirt under the slide.
Yeah.
They are not making life decisions at this point. Quit trying to push, just let them go.
Yeah.
But we're not allowed to say that these days. Well, they're trying not to, but we're still saying it for now. And I appreciate you coming in to say it all for us today. Before I let you go, then, because we're kind of running over time, but it's good. It's always good talking to you. Anything else you're covering on the news quickly before we let you run?
There's a new political party in Saskatchewan,
the
Sask United Party. I've met with some of the leaders of the party. I've had 3 stories up already about them. You can go and kind of see what their platform is. But some of the things we're talking about here, they want to reform the educational curriculum so that families are involved in the decisions, even so much as, permission to have, like when I was a kid, your parents had to sign a permission form for you to have sexual education in grade 7. They want to bring things like that back. But then they're also talking about, no lockdowns, or these digital IDs and forced vaccinations. And they also are interested in civil liberties in general being given back to citizens. Now, some of the people involved with this, you might recognize some names, is Jerry Ritz, his former federal agricultural minister, Nadine Wilson, who's an MLA in the Saskatchewan legislature. She's involved in it as an advisor. And then there's a couple other people. Ken Rutherford, he ran as a Maverick Party candidate at one point. He's involved with, on the board of directors of the new party.
Small seat conservative type of alternative.
They're basically like other parties popping up, like the Ontario Party, the New Blue Party in Ontario in this election, because a lot of the conservative parties, the Saskatchewan Party has been just moving away from conservatism in general. And they had 1,200 people at their first meeting in Saskatoon. And then they had 300 in Regina a couple days later, and they've been going around the province. They've gotten 250 people in places like North Battleford, which is only like, I think 12,000 people in total.
It's significant. You
Yeah,
know?
they are getting good numbers.
Those seeds are
Yeah.
starting, and again, I've been involved in a lot of small party organizing and growing. You know, and sometimes we would have town hall meetings where you'd have 10 people, and if you get 100 and a couple hundred starting to show up, you're getting some momentum. So shouldn't be dismissed.
They're almost at the amount of signatures they need to become an official party, which means they can then get donations, they can open an office, they can hire staff. They are now able through Elections Saskatchewan you can actually now online go in and actually sign to be one of the 2,500 because there's a couple of rules to become an official party. So
great. Well, thank you very much for coming in to talk with us today. Good to see you out here in Calgary. I'm sure we'll talk again, perhaps remotely, but appreciate the coverage out there in Saskatchewan, Chris. It was always a good discussion. And to remind everybody else, it's Christopher Oldcorn on westernstandard.news. Lots of stories and information out there on the go.
Thank you very much, Corey.
All right.